Hello, hello, and welcome to another podcast episode of Overpowering Emotions, where I talk all things big emotions, emotion regulation, and of course, resilience. We are on our journey of resilience. And one of the pieces of resilience is being able to manage our emotions. And today I have a guest who's going to come talk about another tool that we can put in kids' toolbox for emotion recognition, which is really important for us to be able to take a step back and separate ourselves from that big knot of emotions to move on. So I have today Bridgette Melton. She's a passionate educator and children's book author holding a master's in psychology. She's a certified trauma and resilience practitioner. She embraced a trauma-informed approach, recognizing the profound impact that experiences can have on individuals while working with refugees in Greece. Lucky, lucky. I've never been to Greece. I definitely want to go. So that lens really informed her understanding of psychology, but it shapes her interactions with others, fostering empathy and a deep appreciation for resilience and resilience specifically of the human spirit. Her first children's book, Arnold's Silent Heart, embodies her concept, emotion recognition through auditory awareness, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So, thank you for joining me, and I hope you enjoy our conversation. Well, Bridgette, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Well, it is so great to be here. I'm really excited to chat more and share more about just emotional recognition.
Amazing. Why don't we start off by having you introduce yourself to everyone?
Yeah, of course. My name is Bridgette Melton. I am a former educator, so I've been in the classroom. I'm also a big mental health advocate. I have a master's in psychology, which kind of took me down the journey of really helping kids learn how to what their emotions were, emotional recognition, regulation, all of those things. I have a very big fondness for kids from traumatic backgrounds. I've done a lot of study in adverse childhood experiences, building resiliency in with those students specifically, but also across the classroom, which has kind of led me onto this journey to become a children's author. So just launched my first book called Arnold Silent Heart, which is the first one in a series about just emotional recognition through an auditory awareness. So associating that emotion to a sound versus that emotion to a color, like we're so used to doing with zones of regulation. So just another concept for kids to have in their toolbox for that emotional recognition piece.
Okay. And I'm excited to jump into that, looking at that auditory piece. Before we do, maybe uh, it might be helpful just to go over why it's important, that emotion recognition, if you don't mind. Maybe we can start from there.
Yeah, of course. I think that sounds great. Yeah, so the emotion recognition piece is so important. We can look at research all day long and kind of see how it goes back to that brain function of when I can name my emotion, I can much easier get out of that fight or flight kind of mode that my brain knocks me into when something doesn't go my way, especially for young kids, right? That don't necessarily have like the easiest way to emotionally regulate, being able to stop and name the emotion. I'm feeling angry right now. I'm feeling really sad or disappointed or anxious. Really helps them to stop, refocus, and then they're able to move past that emotion, that feeling, with a good game plan in mind of whatever that emotion is, how to come out of it, and onto the other side for that. Again, building that resiliency piece into their lives.
And so tell me about this approach, using auditory information to help them express themselves.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm still knee deep into the research side of the concept specifically, but just really exploring just a different avenue, right? Like I think sometimes it's so easy to get stuck on one thing if I feel angry. So this is a very red feeling for me instead of, maybe what sounds do we hear in our subconscious, perhaps even that when I'm sad, for instance, that's what Arnold Silent's hard about. It's silent, it's quiet. He doesn't hear anything in that moment. And he's like, why is everything quiet? Trying to question and figure it out. So I think just another perspective for kids and even us as adults to really be able to go, hey, when you're feeling this way or you feel like you don't hear anything, why is that? It's like, well, I'm sad because, my friend didn't invite me to play today, or I didn't get to do that fun thing that I thought I would get to do. Again, so just another way of being able to name that feeling, to be able to overcome the big feelings that we have and those big emotions in those times.
And what would be, I don't know if there's a difference or the benefit of kind of focusing on the sound versus like a color that we would do, for example.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think I'm still kind of trying to figure that out, to be completely honest with you. I've read a lot of research that our brains do naturally associate a color with a sound. We may not even realize that. I don't think I realized that until I was really digging in. And I wouldn't necessarily say one way is better than the other. I think it's just a matter of being able to have just another tool to teach kids, like, hey, when you're mad, you might feel angry, but sometimes there's kids that might not even be able to express that. I'm feeling red right now, right? Like, but they can say, I hear a booming sound, or I hear a roaring sound. They can associate something else with that feeling. So I don't necessarily think one is better than the other. I think it's just a matter of having something else for students who may not in that moment be able to connect to a word of or a color, but they can express it to a sound.
I love that. I do a lot of whenever I'm learning a new therapeutic approach, I like being a client just to see from the client's perspective, right? How this is. And there's some approaches, like I know I've had counselors going through, okay, colors, what is that? And I can't come up with a color. I can make up a color, but truly
Yes.
everything's gray and black for me. If I had to pick a color for everything, but there is, like, I know when I'm stressed, I do have a visual, but I also have the sound. Like for me, I just know, like for anger, it's like rattling cages, right?
Yeah.
And then for when I'm really stressed, it's that snow, the fuzzy snow on TVs. I don't even know if
Yeah.
people know what that is anymore, but our TVs don't turn off at a certain time anymore. But like that snow type
Yeah.
sound. And so I love this just because it does give, for these kiddos who might not have a color or a descriptor or whatever else is going on for them. So I think that that's great. Just another tool in their toolbox. So how do we go about starting to teach them this?
Yeah, I think, that's a great question as well. And I think that's, a piece we're kind of still trying to figure out is how do we start teaching our kids that there are other ways to associate sounds? I think it's just a conversation. Obviously, I would recommend, starting read Arnold's Silent Heart. I've got it in the hands of, it's in the hands of the public now, that it's officially launched. And so just hearing feedback stories, of the book from kids and their adult caregivers who have read the book with them, and they're like, yes, this actually is making sense. They're starting to have those conversations and being able to associate that sound of, when I feel this way, this might be what I hear. Just like as you just described, like I hear rattling cages, or I hear, the snowy sound from the back of the TV. I know when I'm like anxious or stressed, it's like a variety of sounds. Like I hear everything. It's just a mixture of a million sounds in my head trying to navigate and separate them. So I think it's just starting the conversation and just helping kids to know, like maybe stopping in that moment. You're like, hey, like you seem upset. What are you feeling? What sound might you be hearing? Like close your eyes. It's another, again, it's kind of that distraction thing for them too, but also helping their brain to stop, name that emotion and re-regulate itself, which I think it's such an important piece when we're talking about emotional regulation, is just being able to stop for a second and just be able to name it. So they get in that moment in those conversations with the kids in our lives going, hey, let's stop for a second. What sound might we be hearing? Because we do that with colors, right? Like what color do you think you're feeling right now? So I think it kind of works the same way of just getting them to stop and be quiet for a second and hear whatever sound that they're associating with those feelings.
And I really See, when I use these strategies, I'm always saying it's not relaxation and we're not trying to get rid of the feelings because we need to experience them all, but it's really keeping that prefrontal cortex online. It's being
Yeah.
mindful, right? That's really the piece here that I think is important to really make sure everybody understands. So whatever we can do to keep that prefrontal cortex online, because that's the part of the brain that helps regulate that emotional brain. But the problem is when we get too overwhelmed with our feelings, we get stuck with it and we,
Yeah.
get caught up in the stories and the anger and the avoidance or whatever else comes out behaviorally, whether it's withdrawing or sort of externalizing that. So by staying in the moment, this is just another tool to help us so that we can take that step back and get perspective, essentially. And I love that. Like I don't like the zones of regulation for so many reasons, but one thing that I think something like this can really help with is there's no uh, I don't know what the word is, but I guess judgment for lack of a better word. There's no good or bad, right? There's no good
Yeah.
sounds or bad sounds. We're not labeling them as such. Whereas I think with things like zones,
Yeah.
kids associate red as bad. So it's
Yeah.
bad to be in the red zone. And so almost always they're like, I'm in green, right? Like they're just, even though
Yeah.
they're clearly not in the green zone, but red they've associated with bad. Whereas we don't really necessarily, maybe we do associate, annoying sounds and things like that, but there's not that inherent judgment. I don't know. That's just kind of my own initial thoughts on this. I don't know if you have anything.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think you're totally right on the zones of regulation thing. Like I've been in education long enough to know like this is how kids associate, and you're exactly right. They associate like I'm red, so this has to be bad, and we often like rank it kind of in like this weird way, maybe not even in a purposeful manner of like green's on the bottom because that's where that's where you're nice and you're calm, where your red's like at the top and you're like through the roof about to explode instead of maybe mixing it up a little bit. But I think you're right. Like with sounds, we all are going to hear something a little bit different in some way. You're going to hear rattling cages. I might hear a roaring sound. A kid might hear a lion or a thunder or something completely different, but none of those sounds are bad. They're sounds. That's what it is in that moment. And you're exactly right. It's a matter of feeling it. It's okay to feel it. That's the whole basis of the book as well, is be brave enough to feel the sound, but don't get stuck in the sound. We've got to figure out how to overcome that loud rattling cage, acknowledge it, feel it, live in it for a moment, and then how am I going to overcome this? How am I going to get this rattling cage out of my head and move into maybe a peaceful, calm breeze blowing in the background, or that's what I'm going to hear when I feel, peaceful and calm. So I think you're right. It's a little bit less of maybe that judgmental way that you're saying, where this is an automatic bad feeling, where it's not. It's okay. Be angry. We all have those moments, and that's totally fine. Feel that anger, feel that sadness, but let's not get stuck in it, and let's not again associate a color with the negative emotion.
And then they get out of the like any shame that can come with that. And then just complete shutdown, right? Like
Yeah.
just I'm bad. Like, I'm feeling bad. It's red. That's bad. Therefore, I am bad. And all the shame that comes along with it. So what would be the next step? Like let's say they do identify the rattling cage or the lion, which actually, it's interesting that you say lion or tiger because when we're overwhelmed with emotions, our sensory perceptions change and how we process sensory information changes. So we actually are more likely to pick up low rumbling, like growling. And
Yeah.
so it's really interesting that you said that because that would make a lot of sense, especially if we're feeling anxious, right? We want to
Yeah.
be on the lookout, and it's just ingrained in our brain to listen out for things that could eat us.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a matter again of what is the next step, right? We have those steps when it comes to the zones of regulation and going, hey, when I'm angry, I'm going to go into my safe place. I'm going to take my 5 breaths. When I'm sad, I know that these are things I need to do. So I think it's kind of teaching it in a similar manner, in a similar fashion when you're hearing these sounds. How do you quiet them and get them to a place that is, you know, a little more peaceful, a little more calm. There is a character throughout the books. Her name is Bella. She represents confidence, and so she's kind of there throughout the series, kind of helping her friends go, "Hey, yeah, I've heard silence before, and this is what I did." So even offering those suggestions, and I think the more that this progresses, the more that we learn and understand and see our students grasping emotional recognition through this concept, we're going to have a better understanding on exactly how to teach it, how to help our kids that we work with in our lives to again associate that sound and then work through it to the next step.
Do you have an example, like a kiddo maybe that you've worked with specifically that you've kind of helped, now that I've identified it, we've kept that prefrontal cortex online, we've been mindful, and then kind of moving past that to the next step?
Yeah, for sure. I'll use my son for an example. He's a great he's a great example to use. He can go from 0 to 60 real fast. And so we've started taking that time and going like, "Hey, I can tell you're upset or you're getting there. How can we get you calmed back down?" So we take that time, we close our eyes sometimes, we'll just take a deep breath, like, "Hey, what are you hearing right now?" And sometimes it's that anger, that frustration. So he's hearing a rumbling or roar kind of sound. Okay, how do we, like, what are we going to do to get us to this calm breeze sound that you hear whenever you're feeling calm and you're happy and you're peaceful, and maybe it's singing, birds chirping, is some sounds that he's kind of thrown out at me. And so we just kind of work our way like to that point of like, I'm mad. We name that madness. Why did we get to this point? How can I overcome it? I'm going to, if it's homework, for instance, I'm gonna, walk away, go get a drink really quick, come back, and then come back and go, hey, I'm hearing some tweeting sounds. For me, confidence sounds like cheering. So I know I can do this math problem. So it's reassociating that rumble sound, that roaring with a bird chirping or a cheering, then feeling that level of confidence kind of come in and go, hey, this is I can do this. I felt that. Here's how I'm going to overcome it.
Is there ever a time where maybe, because I'm one that I always talk about, we got to avoid elimination, right? So we're never focusing on eliminating our anxious feelings, for example, just because it makes sense that you are feeling anxious. I mean, my girls just had evals recently for their sports, right? And my little one, well, both were nervous, but my little one really was talking about, like, I feel like I'm going to throw up, like, I'm just so nervous. There's nothing, until she goes and does it, those physiological feelings are going to be there. So, is there ever a time where maybe those low rumbling sounds or the cage sounds are still there, but we just work, through it regardless, even if it's there?
Yeah, I think so. I think, there's always going to be that opportunity for those sounds to stay there. And we might hear them even when we're hearing a more positive, bird chirping, peaceful breeze, whatever the sounds that we're associating with being happy or calm or content or confident. Those sounds just may be a little bit louder in our hearts and in our minds than that low rumble, even though it's still there. And I think it's okay again, right? Like we both agreed that we should feel the feeling. So it's okay that low rumble stays there, that worry, that thump, that heartbeat of I'm nervous in this moment, but also being able to breathe and go, okay, but I can still louder hear the cheering that I'm going to be okay, the bird chirping that this is a peaceful thing, that I can be confident and find the peace in it. And so I think one sound's going to be louder than the other one, even if they're both happening at the same time.
Okay. And to get to that place of like birds chirping, for example, are you getting kids to actively try to listen to something new, or is it just that's maybe the outcome? Like I'm not sure, right? Like just to get to that place, if it's sort of trying to get there, or it just kind of comes through the
Yeah,
process.
I think right now, just because it's kind of a new, maybe a little bit obscure thought that we're not really used to going stopping and thinking, what am I hearing right now? So I think right now it is kind of not necessarily a prompting, but just like that slowing down, like, hey, let's listen for a different sound, so that they can start then identifying when I hear this sound, this is how, this is normally how I'm feeling. So I think right now it's just an initial like slow down, calm the mind, calm the thought processes. Again, keep it in that prefrontal cortex where we are logically thinking and able to process and working our way up to an understanding of, okay, I went from hearing this sound and now, I was quiet and now I can hear this other sound. And now I'm also feeling this other way. So I think right now it's kind of a slower process while we're teaching the concept, while we're teaching our students this new tool for their toolbox of we're going to have to slow it down and help them to consciously think of what they might be hearing as they progress through those different feelings and emotions.
Right. I've got 2 points. Hopefully, I remember both of them as I say one. So I do think that's really important because it shifts a change. So even though whenever I work with kiddos, my outcome is never to make them feel better. However, by keeping that prefrontal cortex online, oftentimes they do notice things shift and change. So if we focus on the physical feeling, right? Maybe they've got that heavy feeling on their chest, for example. Now we focus on the task or they're focusing on something else and they come back to the chest, it feels different. So I imagine the same way, right? We're paying attention to whatever we're hearing. We shift our focus, we come back. It's probably shift and changed. So I definitely see that. And you did mention that, maybe when we're shifting, the sound changes, but we also feel a shift as well. Do you pair the sound with the words of how I'm feeling, or do you pair it with something else, like, what I'm feeling in my body, for example? Or do you pair it with anything else?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now we're just kind of pairing it with the word, giving them the ability to go, hey, I'm feeling this cage rattling, I'm angry, and we're working through it. We're calming our breathing rate. Like that's just going to be that natural progression of, oh, when I stopped and I processed and I thought through and I named, I'm angry. This is why. Now I'm coming out to the other side and I'm hearing those bird chirp. And so I think it's just being able to then say, when I hear this, I'm feeling calm. I'm feeling happy. I'm feeling content. Whatever the word that the student or the person is going to associate with that sound is kind of theirs. It's their personal sound. I'm not going to hear probably the same sounds that you hear. They may be similar. If we really dug deep into the sound, the different varieties, the different tempos, tones, all of that. If we dug into all of that, I'm sure we hear, sounds in a similar tone setting, but it's still going to be different. But I think it's still going to be very important to name that. Hey, when I feel calm, I hear birds chirping, but also I can breathe easier. I feel a little lighter. I don't feel as heavy. My hands aren't as sweaty. I might not be like as hot or angry, feeling those bodily functions that we feel when we feel angry or content or happy. I think, we can definitely name those as well. Hey, you're hearing birds chirping right now. And oh, you were hearing rattling cages and your fists were, balled up tight. Now, like they're relaxed, and helping them associate the bodily changes that are coming as well, I think is important as well as naming the exact feeling that they're feeling.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. I'm just curious, how did you come to this? How did you come to pairing our feelings with, these auditory sounds?
Yeah, it was kind of just a random thought. I was like, what if we actually did just like, what if we do hear something when we had, when we're feeling whatever we're feeling? What if there really is a sound that we can associate with this, with our emotions? And is this something that we can use for our students or the kids in our lives to have, again, that tool in their toolbox? And I had just casually mentioned it to another counselor friend of mine, and she was like, wait, what? I've never thought of that, but actually maybe we do. And I was like, okay, I'm on it. So that's kind of where the whole thought process idea concept kind of came from. The books were kind of built around that before the research side of things really came in. Now I've dug a lot more into the research and working on building it out as we speak. So yeah, it just kind of started as just what if our kids do have another way to emotionally regulate, to recognize that emotion so they know how to work through it. Again, kind of going back to where we started, we're not always going to see, some of us see black and white. We're not always going to agree that, red is angry. And for whatever reasons, and not that they're, again, not that one is better than the other, but just giving kids another way to express their emotions was really important to me, and where this kind of obscure idea came from.
I love it. I was just actually in Georgia a couple of weeks ago, and I had watched a show actually where who's in it's set in Florida, and they're talking about these red lights with to help turtles, right? So the
Yeah.
hatchlings don't get confused and get
Yep.
lost, right? So they can find. And so in Georgia, they had orangey sort of these orangey red lights. And it's given a whole new meaning to the color red for me because we do think of alert or anger or, danger. And so I'm like, oh, it's actually a color of safety for some. I just was thinking of that and just changing these associations. But this is powerful. Like even just knowing music, how much we are influenced by music. I really do think that we can look at this auditory piece quite a bit more for our emotions. But one of the questions I was going to ask was, do we do this proactively? Do we do it reactively? But if we're doing it proactively, like, are we just causing more problems, bringing kids' attention to their emotions all the time when really, like, we wouldn't have needed to? I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I think that there are times when we're like, "Hey, how are you feeling? Hey, how are you feeling? How are you feeling?" Or you look blah blah blah, and they weren't even acknowledging maybe that they were upset, and we acknowledged it first. And so then it starts this whole cycle. I definitely think there are times that we react reactively, and we're like, "Hey, what is," instead of just kind of waiting for a reaction. I think it's important, obviously, I think it's important to teach kids about their feelings, about their emotions, so that when they are feeling, those bigger, stronger things, that um, they know ahead of time, and maybe they can help get themselves out of that brain function that might be ready to stuff them off. But I think I would agree with you. I think that there are times that we acknowledge and we start talking about their emotions, and then it throws them off and they can kind of go through this downward spiral of, well, I don't know how I was feeling, and I thought I was fine, but maybe I'm not fine. And am I feeling anxious? Am I feeling mad? Like, how am I feeling, instead of just, they're good, right? Like, they're okay. Um, so yeah, I would agree that there are times when we definitely have kids talk about their emotions more than maybe we should.
It's interesting as you were talking, I'm just reminded of a time I was probably about 7 or 8 years old. I had a really bad bike accident, but I just picked myself up. I knew I was hurt. My bike was smashed up. This was back in the day. There's no helmets or anything, right? And I'm just walking home and I'm like happy as a clam. But it wasn't until I got home, my mom came and saw me and she freaked out.
Yeah.
That's so then I look down and I see I'm completely covered in blood. I had no idea. And then all of a sudden I was hurting. So maybe I was in shock, who knows? But it was interesting. Like sometimes I think, yeah, we just I mean, that's a bit of an extreme sort of situation, but we do kind of bring things. So I guess, if we are teaching kids this, how would you recommend doing it so we're not unnecessarily causing more problems and thinking that, something is wrong?
Yeah. Great question. I think I would just keep it simple, right? I think sometimes we overdo it and we make things way too complicated, and then we do overtalk, and then we do, remind the kids in these certain ways. And you're right, like right when a kid falls, if we gas, right, they're more likely to freak out if we're just like, "Hey, you good?" Or wait for them to kind of come along, obviously check, make sure they're good and okay, but not really draw attention to that. So I think in this kind of this regard of just that emotional piece, just continuing to teach it, but in a a low stakes manner in a fun way. I think the books I've written are pretty fun and engaging, but it allows them to see it from a different perspective where they can learn it for themselves, but also like, hey, you remember when Arnold was sad because his friends, blah, 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 and he heard silence. Yeah. And then Bella, whatever. I think just kind of keeping it simple, keeping it fun, keeping it lighthearted, helping them to see it from another perspective in the form of a book. Um, Helps them to learn the concept without necessarily fully having to relate it to themselves or being taught, okay, today we're learning that Arnold is, he's sad, and when he's sad, he hears silence. And what do you hear? And when was the time you're sad? And we walk through the whole process with them. Um, Instead of just keeping it simple, like, hey, and in this story, he's sad today. And this is why we're going to read this story. But at the end, like, he comes out of it. So they still are learning that really important piece of, like, he was really brave when he was sad. He felt that sadness. And it wasn't fun. It was quiet. He heard nothing, but he came out on the other side, and now he knows how to help a friend in the future when they might, tell him, hey, I don't want to hear you anything. What's wrong with me? Um, so yeah, I think it just kind of all goes back to keeping it simple, when we're teaching kids these things.
Anything that I haven't asked or that we haven't talked about that you think is really important to make sure we do mention?
I don't think so. I feel like we've dug pretty deep into it. This is the most that I've gotten a chance to kind of share more of the thought, the idea, the processes behind it, how we start teaching our kids and the students, and whoever, whether we're school counselors or therapists, or whoever we're having communication with, even our own personal kids, and kind of talking through the concept and how to help them identify that sound moving forward and how to get them calm. I think, we've dug really deep into it. So I really appreciate the opportunity to share more and talk through the concept for sure.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure.
I thought I would just share a couple of afterthoughts in and after having this conversation with Bridgette. The big one is really the point that I mentioned about keeping our prefrontal cortex online. That's so important, right? And so this is another great tool for us that we can do that, just being able to get unstuck from our emotions so that we can take that step back, be that third party observer, and really just pay attention, because for some kids it might be a sound, right? For some kids it might be something visual, it might be a color. A lot of times, I mean, I like the using the body because it's very concrete, and we can really focus on and we can really direct our attention to, let's pay attention to our feet. Let's feel the ground on our feet on the ground and supported by the ground. But this just gives another tool. So I do absolutely love this. And just in thinking about ways to teach it. So certainly those seeds, being able to read about it, maybe it being modeled, right? I'm always about adults modeling. I'm feeling really stressed right now, and I can feel it in my chest, and I can hear this ringing sound, this really sharp ringing sound, or whatever that is, just so that we can model, okay, I'm identifying that I'm stressed out right now, and then what's the next thing that I need to do so I can finish making dinner, or I can finish whatever it is that we need to do, so we can start shifting to that what's next, right? That's always so important whenever we do this emotion recognition. More importantly, it's managing it so that we can move on to whatever that next piece is. The one thing that I would also say is maybe you do practice with, as Bridgette was saying, just really small stake tasks. And so maybe it's just, let's pay attention, right? When you're doing something fun, what's something fun? Let's go do something fun. And let's just pay attention to what you're noticing. And again, it could be a color, it could be that physical feeling, it could be a sound, just paying attention. And now let's pay attention to something that's boring. Let's pay attention to something that's hard. We could do things in these really structured, low stakes sort of activities, and making it fun and engaging, because everybody might find something different. What's fun for you might be boring for me, for example. So there's lots of ways that we can explore that, but just always knowing and what's next and how we can shift that. So I think recognizing it is so important. That's part of that externalization. Excuse me. So we can move that outside of ourselves and look at it objectively to keep our prefrontal cortex online. But then it's knowing no matter what the sound, no matter what the feeling, I have a job to do. And what is that job? And what's next? What's next? What's next? So I just thought I would throw that out there. I don't know the research on this. It sounds like, as Bridgette even mentioned, it's very new, and that's okay. And we're all exploring, right? We're all sort of explorers on our journey, and we want kids to maintain that curiosity as they do this. So thank you. Those are my, couple of thoughts as we wrap this episode up. Thank you for joining me today, and I will see you next time.